Well, as we've just heard from Newzroom Africa's business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, who, by the way, is in Davos for the World Economic Forum that's kicking off tomorrow. Minister Godongwane is optimistic that South Africa will make the right friends and partners at the forum. And this year, as geopolitical tensions rage on, WEF has consolidated its focus discussion areas from 21 seen last year to just 4 themes, with achieving security and cooperation in a fractured world as one of the key themes for the week. And to help us make a sense of the significance of WEF and South Africa's relationship with China in this fractured geopolitical climate is Professor Paul Tembe, who is the founder and director of Sele Encounters. Thank you so much for talking to us. And now, interestingly, as the pack was playing, you were saying South Africa quite big in us making those symbolic investments or putting our foot forward to attract FDI, but not quite a real game plan on what to do. Can you talk us through what exactly you mean by that?
Thank you for having me. What I'm saying that let's talk about China first before we go to the World Forum that's taking place now. China is a new kid in the block. So China doesn't have institutional memory in Africa, especially in South Africa. So China is hitting the ground running. So when a new partner moves with means of having the power of appeal, in the process, there are low fruits hanging in this courtship. And I guess that there are some bottlenecks that doesn't allow South Africa to access these low-hanging fruits. The first and primary bottleneck, for example, is the lack of public awareness between China and Africa. The people-to-people mechanism works, yes, but China still remains an enigma in the general populace. I think that is the first step which we have to solve. The second one is policy versus law. We've got lots of progressive policies that could work. That if implemented, then there will be a solution. But most of these policies also, they are not in the book of law in South Africa. So that makes investors get jitters, including China. The other one is short-termism to long-termism. I know most people will question me on this one. That's what do I mean by short-term? I think for a nation that has been oppressed or that has been at the periphery of the international arena for more than 500, 300 years, depending on whom you're asking, the five-year democratic election and change of seat of government is too short to make amends with the traumas that the nation has gone through. And at the same time, that also disturbs the blueprint that is in place. And if the machine is to be driven only by policy without proclamation into the book of law, then that is a little bit cumbersome. We're working backwards. And this also plays to the notion that FDI is the solution for South Africa. We don't have a blueprint, a clear blueprint, an inclusive blueprint that will help us access the goods from the advantages that we are having in South Africa. South Africa is very big internationally. You see that when you travel all over the world, but we are not able to access those goods that are low-hanging fruits, both from our plurilateral partners like China, which our partnerships are very, very much diversified. We don't have tools to access those goods.
And let's talk a little bit about drawing those parallels, because in your latest book, you outline sort of just understanding those relations between South Africa and China. Yeah. And President Cyril Ramaphosa himself, in the week, did get a bit of backlash drawing the parallels between South Africa and China. And I suppose saying that trauma of where we come from, being oppressed, could be that parallel. And he said 100-year economic plan that China has. But is the difference not there that China actually then has that 100-year plan?
The issue here is parallels might end up at trauma only. Let us draw these parallels, just for interest's sake. What did China do in its first 29 years of inception of the People's Republic of China? it closed its doors and it spoke to the Chinese people. And Chinese people had to know that China belongs to Chinese population. And they made means to industrialize China. But first, they had to take a disjuncture from the old feudalism geographies and feudalism systems, feudalism modes of production. In South Africa, we haven't taken that disjuncture in our first 30 years. Because if you count from 1949 to 1978, when opening up and reform, when China was ready to face the world, China was 29 years old. We are 30 years old. We have not taken that disjuncture, the abandonment of human geographies of apartheid, the abandonment of spatial geographies of apartheid, the abandonment of modes of production where the previous regime still has a room to play. So the parallel ends there in the trauma. If you're a swimmer, you put on a swimming suit and go into a swimming pool. Then a footballer cannot say, just because he's an athlete, say, I'll learn from that swimmer. I like this talk of, let us learn from China.
Yeah.
If you are to learn from China, what are the prerequisites of establishing a vast trickle-down effect? Because that's what happens in China.
Yes.
The funnel is upside down. The goods and investment, they get up here. Then there's a popular trickle-down effect. Real GDP is visible in China and amongst the Chinese, in the sense that in 30 years, China has managed to quadruple the standard of living of its people. And an added factor is that one of the sustainable development goal of the United Nations, the first goal, eradication of poverty, China achieved that in 1921. That is 10 years before the mark in the world. So you have to ask yourself, for example, and say, can South Africa do that?
Can we do it, Prof, if we are still with the ruling party, the priority action plans or the priority action plans are the same ones we've seen over the last 15 years?
I've mentioned short-term, long-term policy and law, but then also there's a last bottleneck. This bottleneck also has, I can even term it as, our policies are not people-centered. Our policies still remain within the notion of the magic hand of capitalism, that the government shouldn't interfere. If we speak about traumas, it means there are those who are left by design at the periphery. So what are the means that take these who are at the periphery to the center? Not taking them for taking sake, but making them part and parcel of the system. We continue talking about the Bill of Rights. We continue talking about the old book of freedoms and democracy with its definitions that we have here in South Africa. And yet, when it comes to the crunch, we go to the new book, our new friend. If we count even in terms of dollars, there are billions of Chinese money that is supporting some projects in South Africa, whereby we would have failed from our old traditional friends. So there is another parallel with our old friends, and there's another parallel with our new friends. We cannot learn from China if our system of governance is not conducive into the manner in which Chinese produce knowledge, produce goods.
And when or how long do you think it would take for South Africa to sort of grow up and be an adult in its own right, be able to pick those right friends? As you're saying, we can't say we are looking to China but not picking things like making policies people-centered, while we say we're trying to get rid of poverty. And with 2024 being such an important year globally with all the elections taking place, where do we stand, and what's the step that, you know, the ruling party but also the citizens of this country should take in terms of sort of standing up, knowing who, how to build those relationships that can grow the economy?
Unfortunately, without being condescending, our citizens have become spectators to the ongoings in South Africa for the last decade. Even the blueprints that were in place that you've spoken about, I don't see the reason why they have to change a name because there's a new incumbent. There's only one reason for that. It means it's getting rid of the former policies in order to enact new policies because of the incumbent. That is not a system. That is action by whim. So what we need, if I'm to be a little bit brutal, we need a reset button. And I really hope we could use the 2024 with the watershed that is coming globally to press a reset button in South Africa. And it wouldn't even cause a lot of damage, that reset button. I'll tell you why. We've got 3 wars going on. Ukraine, Russia, the second war, Hamas, Israel, with Hezbollah waiting in Lebanon. And we've got the third war, and that is the most interesting war. America is at war with itself. And that is accompanied with 3 risks. The first risk is a partitioned Ukraine. That will have its own consequences as well. And then the second one is the Middle East that is at the brink. And who is the king or the queen in this chess game? Again, it is the American election, whether Democrats or Republicans win, that will have an impact. And remember that all of this happens at a time when we have not fully recovered from the pre-COVID supply chains, pre-COVID growth, job losses. So I think South Africa has got nothing to lose by hitting a reset button at this point in time. And it is a pity because, as you said at the beginning of the interview, South Africa is very good with symbolic investment. For example, let's take the case in point of the International Court of Justice. This is not the first time South Africa does something like this, but this one is magnitude. This is our speciality. Mandela Magic, from 1994 onwards, we're hitting above our weight. Conflict in Darfur, we're there to mediate. South Sudan and Sudan, we were there to mediate. Now we are going to DRC. Well, there are many views on that, but the fact is we are good in planting the seed of symbolic investment. And the best thing with symbolic investment is that you never know when you are going to harvest, but the input is always smaller than the output. Output can be huge. We see it now happening with China. Symbolic investment of China helped liberation movements. Symbolic investment of African countries in 1971 supported the PRC to be the sole representative of the Chinese people. That was the symbolic investment. So that is the likability of China and Africa. And thus I say, we as South Africa and perhaps the continent as a whole, we are not aware what China is ready to give. So let us go to President Xi Jinping's initiatives. Global Security Initiative, which is one of the themes in Davos. Global Development Initiative, one of the themes in Davos. Global Civilizational Initiative, which states that, as South Africa is doing, each and every nation in its civilization has got something to put in the international table. And South Africa is very good at that type of investment. But we don't have the pipeline to harvest. We don't have the pipeline to harvest. Davos is a very good opportunity for us because we have 100 governments represented there. We've got 1,000 partner enterprises or companies that are helping in Davos. Yes, we are going to make friends. But how do we then streamline those results and have a larger trickle-down effect? Because as long as we don't have a larger trickle-down effect in South Africa, the problem is going to be the following. The problem is going to be, yes, those people who are coming with the FDI and some local players, which are very small percentage, they are going to make profit for profit's sake. And we are here having this dialogue. in order to see how can we make our society better.
The main question.
That's the main question.
So not make those relationships just for the sake of it, but to actually have a plan to see through that harvest. Professor, thank you so much for talking to us and giving us those insights. And of course, that's Professor Paul Tembe, who is the founder and director of Sele Encounters, that is a cross-civilization communication strategies and analytics platform that helps to streamline policies from Africa and China, Global South and Global North. Thank you for that conversation. It's time for a quick break, but before we do, let's take a look at other international news that made headlines in the week that was.